We have been in this series called Everything Revealed, and we missed last week because of the weather. But the week before we kicked it off, we opened the floor, and many of you, oh my goodness, the conversations that we were able to have in this space did not surprise me, but also at the same time reminded me of how much therapy we all actually need in here. When we talk about Everything Revealed, this is, for those of you that are just joining us, this is teaching 2 of what I have now resided is going to be 666 teachings on the book of Revelation, all right? Because I couldn't figure out where we're going to stop, and I was like, well, 666 makes perfect sense, so we'll stop there. We're going to be in this series for the next couple of years, and it was 1 year, but then I realized we couldn't just compact it to 1 year. We got to go to 2, and 2 is going to be at best. All right. I've got about 12 sermons on the mark of the beast that are coming at some point, but we'll get there. That's later on in the book. Right now, we're still in chapter 1. All right. So, 2 weeks ago, we stepped into chapter 1. We opened the floor, and we just made like a very simple declaration. The book of Revelation is not a future prediction about the end of the world. Now, I repeat that again today. I will not be able to repeat past sermons as we move on throughout this series because it would take the whole time. But I feel like I need to say that today in the context of LA fires, all right? The book of Revelation is not a future prediction about the end of the world. I cannot tell you how relevant of a series this is for us in this moment. As a new administration comes in, wildfires out here in LA, we've got snow in Atlanta, and what you have are a whole bunch of people who know nothing about the book of Revelation, and they're all going, it's apocalyptic. It's the end of the world. It's happening. And I, as a scholar from Emory University, am shaking my head going, no, no, no. You don't understand what you are saying. First of all, the word apocalypse is not what we mean when we say apocalypse. For many of us, when we say apocalypse, we think end of the world scenarios. And that's just not what John had in mind. In fact, in Greek, the word apocalypse, it actually literally, that's a Greek word, it literally means an unveiling. Or this is why we get the English word in your Bible when you flip there, it's revelation. Singular, not plural, okay? Remember that. It's not book of Revelations, it's book of Revelation, all right? It's one. And here's the idea behind it. The apocalypse, what John is doing, is he's not giving some future prediction. John didn't sit down. By the way, I went back and watched my sermon 2 weeks ago because I'm a narcissist. And I went back and watched, and I noticed 2 weeks ago when I said John didn't write, I was typing. First of all, John didn't have a computer, okay? So we need to start there. So my bad. I own that, all right? Second, as John was writing with whatever he's writing with, I can assure you he was not writing going, oh, Trump, Harris, 2025, America, LA wildfires, that's what I'm writing about. No, that's not what John had in mind. He's writing from a particular place to a particular group of people at a particular space and time in history, all right? And what he's doing is not giving them some roadmap to things that are going to be laid out as time progresses. Wrong. He's actually writing in cycles, which we'll get into, all right? But what he's doing is he's pulling back the veil. He's opening the curtain, and what he wants you to see are the deep, dark shadows buried within the empire of the first century. And the reason this book is so relevant for us right now is because we happen to live in one of the greatest empires in the history of human civilization. And when John was writing, he was living underneath an empire that was the greatest the world had ever seen. And so maybe what we can learn is if we can pull back the veil and lean into what John is showing us. John is showing us things that we don't want to see, but things that we desperately need to see. And then ultimately, I believe John is just calling us. He's calling this first century audience going, come out. Come out from among them and be separate. We'll get to that verse. It's later on in Revelation, but I think that's the thesis of his entire book. Now, all that said, what we're trying to do here is I'm trying to strip away all the layers that we've been handed. Now, last week, my goodness, we talked about all those layers. Many of you grew up like me, evangelical in the 1990s. And for all of you that are like, you were born much later, God, what a gift you've been given. Because I don't know if you're not aware of this, but the 80s and 90s were a wild time to be alive. I was born in 81, and so by the time I hit like a real age of consciousness, was like really cooking, like we were into the 90s. And what happened in the 90s was we were given what's called this guy named Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins produced Left Behind, which was like a series of fictional books, by the way. And then those books turned into movies with Nicolas Cage and Kirk Cameron. And all of our youth group gatherings, it seemed like all of them were about the end of the world. That was the way that it worked. Like you would show up and they would talk about, tell me if you remember this, they would be like, kids, you all know what a guillotine is? And I remember as a kid going, I don't know what that is. And then they would show us images of people chopping people's heads off. And then they would say, if you don't know Jesus, you're going to go through this tribulation. But if you invite Jesus in your life and say this prayer, you'll be, check this out, raptured out of here before it gets really bad. And then you're like 12, 13. What other option do you have here? It's like, yeah, I want to be raptured out. Like, take me, right? It's always interesting to me looking back because my people were far more concerned about what the Smurfs were doing to my soul than they were about what the book of Revelation was doing to my soul. Do you know what I'm saying? I was banned from watching the Smurfs, but encouraged to read Revelation. Does that make any sense to anyone? They were like, be careful with those mushroom houses and that magic on the Smurfs. But listen, blood as high as the horse's bridle, guillotines, chopping people's heads off. I need you to read as much as that as you possibly can, all right? This is the world in which I grew up. And so I spent much of my adult years, check this out, much of my adult years walking through therapy, and I'm not over-exaggerating this, walking through therapy, having to heal my inner child, my wounded child, who was terrified that a trumpet was going to sound at any moment, and we were all going to be raptured out of here. And now we're going to get to, I'm going to spend a whole Sunday in the rapture, but the rapture is not in the Bible. It was created in 1830, so we'll get there, right? But I mention all that to you to say it's detrimental that we at least jump into this idea of Revelation and try to make some sense out of what's happening. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give us specifically a historical and literary reading of the actual book. I want to do my best to strip away all the layers that we were handed and explore perhaps how the first century readers would have understood this book. Now, to do that, today I want to move. We read the first 3 verses 2 weeks ago. Now I want to finish chapter 1, and we're going to skip some parts. There really is no way to go verse by verse through Revelation. We would literally never finish, but I am going to do my best to go chapter by chapter, all right? So here, we'll pick up here, all right? And what I want to do today is, this is a really good day for you to be here. So if you have to miss like Sundays moving forward, this is the base, all right? What I'm going to tell you today, everything's hinged on this historical context today. So I'm going to give you the history that this book is written in, and everything will flow out of it. Now, once you get today and you start to read the book, you'll start to put pieces together really fast, okay? So this is Revelation chapter 1. We'll pick up here. This is verse 9. I, John, your brother. Pause here for just a second. Most scholarship says this is not the John who wrote the Gospel of John. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty around who this John is, if it's even really a John. There are a lot of people who wrote in the name of other people who had authority. So there's some scholarship debate that this is just some group of people that were a part of the Johannine group that are writing in the name of John. But most scholars say it's not the disciple John or the one who wrote the Gospel John. And they also, a lot of scholarship says they believe 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John is written from a completely different John. And then there's this John, because John was a very common name in the first century, all right? But I mention that to you because most scholarship says, and this is just a head nod to whoever this John is or the group of people that wrote it, they said there's no way it was the John who wrote the gospel because the John who wrote the gospel had such good Greek, and they say the writer of Revelation is not very intelligent, all right? Now, this is what scholars say. They've looked at the Greek, and they say his Greek is really bad, all right? So it's like there would never be apostrophe. He wouldn't know your or your, do you know what I'm saying? Like, his Greek Thank you, Joe. His Greek was just not very good. All right. And so that's how they do it. So they look at the syntax of the text and they're like, there's no way this writer's the same as this writer, unless something really crazy happened from that writer all the way to this writer. Now, all that said, John, I, your brother, who share with you the persecution and the kingdom and the endurance in Jesus. So you already get some historical context right there, okay? And then check this out, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Now, Patmos was where the empire took all the folks who were rebelling against the empire. All right. So they'd either execute you or they would say, we got to get rid of this guy. So they would move them to an island. All right. Verse 10, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Now, I don't even know what that means, but I've heard it used before. And how fun does that sound? Like, Pastor, you were in the Spirit today. What else is there to be in? I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. Now, I want to pause right here, okay? This is our first taste of weirdness in John, okay? So if you're here and you're like, oh, so far it's been pretty tame, we're getting into the woo in just a few seconds, all right? But let me say something before we get into the woo. Already, be careful. He said like, and that's an important word, all right? So he's making metaphors here, okay? But in just a few moments, you're going to start to see some weird things. I promise you, these weird things are only going to get worse. As we move into the book, it's going to get stranger and stranger and stranger, but we're going to do our part to try to understand how the first century would have heard these ideas. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, saying, write in a book what you see, and send it to 7 churches. Interesting, okay? So here's what we know. This John individual apparently leads 7 different spiritual collectives. He's been exiled because, according to what he said, he was telling people about the way of Jesus. So he's exiled to an island, and then as he's on the island, he has this moment where something like a trumpet speaks to him and says, write down what I'm about to tell you and send it to all the spiritual collectives that you help lead. And so, this is what he does. To Ephesus, to Smyrna, that's us. God, I've been waiting on that one, and it landed as good as I wanted it to. To Pergamum, to Thyatira, to Sardis, to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. Then I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me. That would make sense. That's what you do, right? If you heard a voice that sounded like a trumpet, you heard it, list of the church. He's like, I turned around and be like, who's this? And on turning, I saw, hang with me, 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, I saw one like the Son of Man. That is a loaded term from the book of Daniel, chapter 7. He was clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash across his chest. He was Mr. Universe. His head and his hair were white as white wool, white as snow. It's almost like he's hinting that this person had deep wisdom. His eyes were like a flame of fire. It's as if the writer is going, this individual can see like most folks can't see. His feet were like burnished bronze. There's this magnificence there. Refined as in a furnace. And his voice was like the sound of many waters. You know, you've been around many waters. It's like power. In his right hand, he held 7 stars. And from his mouth came a sharp, 2-edged sword. Well, I'm intrigued. John's having a moment, and I'm here for it. Okay, John, before we go any further, what drugs did you take? Second, explain to us this image. Now, he knows what he's doing. He also knows in his first century context, people would have been like, okay, things were normal, just got a little bit strange, but he keeps going. And his face was like the sun shining with full force. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he placed his right hand on me, saying, this is so great, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever and ever. Oh, also, heads up, I have the keys of death and of Hades. Now, write what you have seen, what is, and what is to take place after this. And then I love what John does here. He gives us a sneak peek. This is huge. This is huge. Of how to unlock like the remainder of his writing. Because if you first read that and you stopped there, we'd be going, what does that mean? Apparently there's this image with the guy with a sword. That feels very magic to me. Like, is this like the Vegas Strip? Are we doing like shows? Like somehow God like has this sword down his throat. Like this all feels a little strange. And then here's what he does. Immediately he's showing you, he's giving you insight into the literary genre in which he's writing. As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands, here's how this is going to work. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. And those 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. You see what he did? He just interpreted the symbols and metaphors that he was using. So pause. Already we know this. The things we're going to read moving forward cannot be interpreted literally. Okay? And most people, even futurist Left Behind readings, don't interpret it literally. This is why they look, and when John writes about a locust, they don't interpret it literally. They just say that locust is an Apache helicopter. Okay? Right? So let's just start there. There is no literal interpretation of the book of Revelation. We know from what John is doing right there is he's using metaphor and symbol to drive home a deeper point. Now, I want to start here with the historical context of Revelation, okay? People, my God, I was so angry last week when we canceled because this thing has been just in my body. And I just want to go ahead and say right now, I'm going to go for it. And if your eyes gloss over, I don't care today. I just want you to know that. I do, but I don't, all right? Because I need to push through this. And I hope you see this. I want you to see this so you can get a really good grip on the world in which this book is writing, okay? So we're going to go fast. Now, let me start here. To know what the text means, you have to first know what the text meant, okay? Take that mantra with you every time you read any ancient text. To know what the text means, you have to first know what the text meant. Now, to get at what this text meant, we need to get close to the world in which John is writing. Now, most common scholarship agrees that the book of Revelation was written in the late 1st century, somewhere around 95 to 96 Common Era. Now, I want to pause here. This is key. Revelation is written in the late 1st century, 95 to 96. Now, I should say, just in case there are a lot of scholars that are watching, which most of them probably don't, but I will say this to them, a head nod to them. There is a small select few of scholars who would argue with that date, and they would say, actually, we believe Revelation was written somewhere around the time of Nero, all right, which is between 54 and 68 or 70 AD when the fall of the temple in Jerusalem happened. However, by and large, in 2025, most scholars have moved that out of the way and said, nope, we're fairly confident that the entire book was written right here, 95 to 96 Common Era, end of the late 1st century. Now, the reason why that's important is because we need to get at what was happening in the world around the time of the late 1st century, why John would even be motivated to write this. Now, to get there, I need to tell you about the Roman Empire. Some of you have probably heard a little bit of this, but we're going to go deep into a specific emperor in just a minute. Now, in the 1st century, the world was ruled by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was ruled by a list of Caesars. Now, I want to give you these Caesars, all right? So we had Augustus, 27 BCE to 14 CE. His actual name was Octavian. He was adopted by Julius. You know Julius. He's the guy who made the Caesar salad. But Augustus... God, I got him all day. I have become my father. All right, so, but then he adopted Octavian. Octavian name changed to Augustus. Yeah, Augustus, 27 BCE to 14. Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Now, that's a big one, not because Revelation is written during the time of Nero. No. There's verses that I can show you. I'm fairly certain that's not true. But I am going to say this. When we get deep into the book, there is a moment where John does reflect back on the time when Nero was reigning, okay? So we're going to get back to that. And anyone who knows anything about the historical context of Revelation is like, yeah, talk to me, all right? And then there was like these three various emperors during 68 and 69, Vespasian, and then Titus, and then Domitian, all right? Now, I want to pause right there because if you'll notice, Domitian, he's reigning during the time that the book of Revelation was written, so 81 to 96 CE. Now, here's what you need to know about Domitian. Domitian was the son of Vespasian and the younger brother to Titus. And if you know anything about who Titus is, he's the one who captured and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE, okay? Now, I want to show you a picture of Domitian, all right? So here's a statue that we've recovered. There he is, all right? Now, at first glance, you'd be like, he looks like a harmless guy. I mean, if you're just judging him by his outward appearance in stone, you're like, seems nice. Hair looks good. Outfit's solid. Seems to be all shaved. Clean-cut guy. He's like all-American. Here's what you need to know about Domitian, all right? And I'm going to do my best to stick to the script so you don't think I'm over-exaggerating, because I don't think you can over-exaggerate. Two emperors, Nero and Domitian. There's no way to over-exaggerate them. But I want to tell you the best I've got here on Domitian, all right? You can just leave this image up for just a second. Domitian was, hands down, even the historians say this, the most of all the emperors, and if you know anything about the Roman Empire, this is a very giant statement, they all agree Domitian was the most egotistical Roman emperor that has ever lived. Egotistical. The man wanted his name on everything. Everything, okay? He was an authoritarian, and he was a vicious dictator. Jeremy Duncan, in his book Upside Down Apocalypse, which the whole series is basically me plagiarizing his work, so head nod to him. We have met online. I slid into his DMs. He slid into mine, and we both hugged each other, and I said, I will be teaching your work for the next year, all right? And he didn't actually give me permission, but he said, have fun, all right? So I have to make sure I'm giving him credit every time, all right? And maybe we'll have him out here at some point because I really love his stuff. Now, Jeremy Duncan in Upside Down Apocalypse said this. He said, Domitian set out ambitious plans, so this is what he did, all right, to recapture the glory of Rome. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you phrases like make Rome great again were actual ideas that this individual, Domitian, was like after. His whole intent was Rome had kind of backpedaled, and what he was trying to do was he was trying to set it up to get it back to its glory era, its glory days, okay? So Domitian set out ambitious plans to recapture the glory of Rome. So he started new wars to expand the borders, okay? So it wasn't enough. His goal was, I need to take over property, over lands, all right? So he started new wars because he was going to implement and make it mandatory for certain spaces that were named other things to be changed, okay? He's expanding the borders. There were massive construction projects across the empire. I mean, this guy was like, oh, we're building new buildings as tall as they can be. We're going to expand the infrastructure, all of it. Like, this is what Domitian did. And he did something else. He revived what is called the emperor cult with renewed vigor in his time. However, this time it was different. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the emperor cult, we're going to get into it, but it started early with the emperors, and the idea was that when the emperors died, they would be deified in their death, okay? So when they died, they would be considered gods, and so people would begin to worship that particular god. Now, you understand in the first century, it's like a polytheistic, like there are all kinds of gods. So there were like layers to the gods. But these emperors, when they died, they would be treated like a god. Hence, Julius Caesar, when he died, it is said that after he died, Augustus saw a falling star and said that this was actually Julius ascending to sit on the right hand of the throne of God, okay? And so, if that were true and people believed it, then what they said was that makes Augustus, check this out, what? The son of God. Okay? So you had God, and you had the son of God. And so when these emperors would die, they would be worshipped. Here's what Domitian did, and this is why they said he was so egotistical. Domitian said, that is true. They are gods when they die because they go up to sit on the right hand of the throne of God. But I want to take it one notch further. The emperor cult is great. Worship the emperor. But why are we waiting till they die? Because if they're gods when they die, they're gods before they die. And so Domitian essentially said, hey, friends, bow down, because I am Lord and God. Okay? Domitian gave himself the title, and I quote, Lord and God. And he required everyone to address him in this specific way, specifically his own wife. I practiced that this week. I got up in the morning and I went down waiting for my breakfast, which was never made. And I stood there and I said, Katie, I'm here. And I never heard the words, my Lord and my God. But I did hear other words. And I think it was dumb. Anyways, so I know already you're like, I like this Domitian guy. It's going to get better. You ready? He issued an edict that all statues of him that were created, and he loved a good statue. Loved a good statue. He wanted all of them everywhere. He issued an edict that all statues of him had to be made specifically in solid gold. He hired an imperial choir of, and this is key, and we're going to get into this, 24 elders or 24 singers that followed him around publicly singing his praises. They would sing words like this: Hail to the Lord, Hail. Victory, Lord of the earth, invisible, power, glory, honor, peace, security, holy, blessed, great, unequaled, thou alone. Worthy is he to inherit the kingdom. They even would sing songs like, Come, come, do not delay, and when you're dead, rise from the dead and come back again. The court poets, when they sat around the Olympic Games, did everything they could to get as close as they could to him. Ever been around someone famous? You ever seen the gawking and the faunting around someone who's famous? I haven't really been around a lot of famous people, but I did go to the U.S. Open this year. And I made my way over to where the people, start their tee. And I told Katie, I was like, I'm going to follow around one person. His name is Tiger Woods. Because in my opinion, there is no greater golfer in the world. And I just want you to know this, I'm not even here to argue that. It's unarguable. That's not even like you want to debate. Why would we ever debate, right? So I followed around Tiger for 18 holes. And let me tell you something. I was exhausted by watching him and watching the people following him. And check it out. I was the one causing the scene, right? Like, I'm talking people were like, oh, Tiger, like everywhere you go. And here's the thing. Just to lay eyes on him when he slings a club, it's like, oh God, that's magic. That's magic. This is the idea here, all right? The court poets, they would have to hold off the crowds during the Olympic Games because everyone wanted to lay eyes on Domitian. And it's said of the court poets who actually had access into the inner sanctum of the emperor, it was said that they said, and I quote, "May I gaze upon thee, Domitian, hope of mankind and favorite of all the gods. If I could just gaze upon you, and then if I could go one further, if I could touch your very garments." There's this word called neokoros. 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 This essentially is location or headquarters outside of the dominant headquarters of Rome that the emperor got to choose. And so for Domitian, he set up his headquarters, or Neocorus, outside of Rome in a particular city. It's called Ephesus. All right? And in Ephesus, Domitian built his temple on the water where everyone who came into Ephesus, the first thing they saw was his temple on the edge of the coast. And on that temple was, to date, one of the largest statues that's ever been erected, all right? On that temple. And it's actually sitting in a museum in Turkey right now, all right? Now, it's housed in a museum in Turkey, and Domitian built this temple on the water, and he decided to build this statue because it's Domitian, and the scale of the entire statue is estimated to be at 27 feet tall. I actually brought a picture of what it looks like in the museum, all right? This is his arm, and this is his face. Now, that arm alone, they tell us the scale of it is 9 feet tall. So imagine if you're standing up against, if you could do like a ratio, stand up against that arm and you're 6 foot tall, you get the feel for how long and how large that hand is. Now, there's a particular thing that's happening here that I'm going to tip you off with for the next couple of weeks, okay? When I say next couple of weeks, next couple of years. All right, here it is. That hand looks like it was at one time holding something. It appears to be closed, almost closed, holding a little bit. So there's something to this image. But this statue, 27 feet tall, arm 9 feet tall, was sitting on the temple that was dedicated to emperor worship to Domitian in the city of Ephesus. All right? Now, all that said, you understand a little bit of the emperor and the empire that John is writing under. There's a great writer. His name is Ethelbert Stauffer. Now, he wrote a book called Christ and the Caesars. If I were to recommend any book for you, it is a little bit of tough sledding, but if I were to recommend any book for you that you really want to nerd out on history, read this book, Christ and the Caesars. He takes you through all the Caesars, and he parallels it to the stories in the text. So he takes a historical look, but then he parallels what's happening, all right? And he writes a whole thing on John and Domitian, and we're going to be using a little bit of it in the coming days, but it is mind-blowing stuff. Now, Ethelbert Stauffer wrote this: "We may read the book of Revelation with new understanding now, when we see it in its apostolic reply to the declaration of war by the divine emperor in Rome, and when we realize the perilous political situation in which the book was both written and published." They had just come off the Roman-Jewish War. They now find themselves under the most egotistical emperor that's ever lived. And it's clear, though we don't have historical evidence of as much actual persecution as there was during Nero, it is clear there's some severe persecution that's happening. John apparently was speaking up against the empire, and he got pushed to the edges and taken to Patmos. And now John is writing 7 churches, specifically, living underneath Domitian and this Roman Empire. And what is John trying to do then? With that context, what we understand, as Ethelbert Stauffer said again, if that is true, then here's what we need to understand Revelation as. Revelation is a weapon against the Dominion's empire. Revelation is wartime literature. Revelation is anti-Roman propaganda. Revelation is, as some scholars have said, resistance literature, written to encourage and give hope to first-century readers underneath the Roman Empire. Revelation is indeed about salvation, but it's salvation underneath full oppression. Now, I want to give us a warning here, because it would be easy for us to look at Revelation and go, oh, this would be fun, but all of it's already happened. It's great. Yes, actually. Now, there are many different ways to read the book of Revelation. Most of you probably know that, especially if you grew up under Left Behind. You're like, oh, this is all stuff to come, right? That's a futurist reading. There's also what they call a historical reading or a preterist reading. And that idea is that everything in Revelation's actually already happened. So you can make parallels, right? You're like, but what about all the violence and all of those scenes where everything is gone and there's earthquakes and volcanoes? There are actual books out there that can parallel almost everything John writes in symbolism to actual literal events that took place throughout the first century, from volcanoes erupting to earthquakes, et cetera, et cetera. And so it would be easy to look at Revelation and go, oh, John's writing about his first century, so that's all happened in the past. But here's a bit of the problem with that understanding. Feels good, and certainly there's a lot of truth there. But if we're not careful, then that makes the book irrelevant to us. Because it kind of is just more like a history book. You know what I mean? And I don't know about you. I mean, I enjoyed history, and no offense to anyone who teaches history, but man, I caught a lot of naps during history class. And it wasn't because it wasn't interesting. It just didn't really apply to me, is what I always thought. Like, oh, it's just history. Like, history is history. And then I also wrestled with, how do we even know if it's true? Because everyone comes from a particular perspective. And most history is written from the person who was victorious. And so here's the challenge. You can read it going, all these things are about to happen. Well, that's dangerous, because that means you need violence to happen in order for the end to come. You could read it as if some of it happened, but some of it hasn't. That's what they call like mid-trib, right? So you have like pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. You could read it that way. Like, okay, he's writing about it, but then yet there's some stuff that hasn't happened yet, and it's coming, okay? You could read it as a preterist going, it's all already happened. Great. I lean more towards preterism, but I want to say this to you too. I also hold that real loose, because here's why. Because I don't think Revelation is just a book about history. I think there's far more to it than that. Rome is the context for John's images. But this isn't just about Rome. This is a timeless revelation for every reader. This book was not written to us. This book was not written to us. But it is relevant for us. Why? Not because it predicts our future, but because it reveals to us what is true about all empires. And it shows us how you and I can live out the way of love and the way of Jesus underneath an actual empire. And so the invitation of Revelation is not to read it and say, oh my God, let's decode it. Like, give me the mathematician, Cody, over the next 2 years, throw it up on the screen, and let's decode every symbol John uses, because it's coming. The seventh trumpet is going to blow. And I'm telling you, it's all going to end the way John says it's going to end. No. The invitation is to find our story inside of John's story. The invitation is to lean in and listen to what John is learning underneath the Roman Empire. The invitation is to see, are there any parallels as John pulls back the curtain to the first century empire that maybe is also true about our own empire? And here's where it gets tricky. Some scholars say people that live affluently in an empire don't need to read Revelation at all. Some say this book only makes sense to those who've been oppressed from an empire. They say it gets really dangerous when very, very wealthy people that are benefiting from the empire pick up the book and read it, because then, if we're not careful, they can begin to use it as a scare tactic to further the actual empire. And you miss like some of its central themes when you are the individual benefiting from the actual empire. And I say, I don't know of a better time in American history than this very moment to lean into the words of John in the book of Revelation. I don't know of a more pertinent moment in our nation's history than right now, where we need the veil to be pulled back. And I know it's not easy, and it's going to be hard. And guess what we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about our involvement in it, and we're going to talk about economics. And we're going to talk about all the things that make up an empire that we benefit from. And these are not going to be easy conversations. But here's what I know. I believe John is leading us somewhere. And here's what I know. John is unveiling the curtain because it's like he's telling us, listen, we can no longer turn our heads to this. We have to see it. See it for what it is. And in the midst of all of that, John just injects this amazing hope to all of his first century readers going, hey, don't lose hope. There's something happening here. There is something going on right in the midst of all of this. And this is what John begins to show us. Now, that's a brief synopsis of history. Now, I need you to know one thing. Domitian, being the egotistical leader that he was, he started his own Olympic Games, which makes sense. And these Olympic Games, he very cleverly, because he's Domitian, he was like, well, what are we going to name them? And he's like, well, we'll name them the Domitian Games. Sounds right. So Domitian created the Domitian Games. And I'm going to use a parallel for the remainder of the series that I'm going to keep coming back to. And what I'm going to do is place the writings of Revelation in the context of the Domitian Games, okay? Head nod to Elfa Brutstoffer, who actually did this, was the first scholar I've ever seen do this, and it blew my mind when I read Revelation. So think of Revelation as one giant Olympic game. Think of Revelation as all of us going, you guys want to go to Ephesus? Let's go. And then Domitian built a stadium in Ephesus. And you could parallel it to like, tomorrow night there's a national championship downtown Atlanta. Feel bad for them. They're going to freeze. Whoever's tailgating. But you're going to get in there, and there are going to be thousands of people. This is our version of the Olympic Games. Now, no one's coming out, and they're not going to release lions and beasts and then have, people who've disobeyed, and there'll be a bloodbath. But metaphorically speaking, there'll be a bloodbath. There'll be a bunch of guys who put on pads, because they're not who they used to be with the Romans, all right? And they will ram each other, right? And a whole group of people will cheer. This is the idea. But Domitian, because, this is ancient world, he's like, I want to have my own national championship. And I want to name it after me, so it's going to be called the Domitian Games. And then I want to decide who's in it, what it's going to look like, all that kind of stuff. And so he does. And there are lots of things that happen in Domitian Games. We're going to get into it. But I will tell you one thing. From what we're about to start next week to the end of the book, you could literally take it from the Olympic Games and set it in the book of Revelation. It's like Revelation is like a satire for what took place in the Olympic Games. And it's like the writer is going, I'm going to use this as an illustration because I know my audience knows something about those Domitian Games. But I'm going to twist it, and I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to play with that image. So I need you to drop that into your psyche and remember that as we move forward. Now, before we close, let me give you this, okay? You guys have been great. I told you I had a lot of information, and hopefully it's been helpful, all right? I need to talk to you just briefly about what John is doing with the literature here, okay? John is using a very popular genre. He's actually using two. Let me give these to you, okay? John is using apocalyptic literature, and John is using prophetic literature, all right? Let me just start here with apocalyptic literature for a minute. And if you're like, I don't even know what this means, this is all so weird. Just know John knows exactly what he's doing. The moment we got into those weird symbols where it felt weird, like 7 temples, you're like, what is that? That's weird. That's why I don't read the Bible. That is a genre. So here's what you need to know. That genre in the late first century, very popular genre. So John was like a man of his time. He was, quote, progressive. He's like, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. These people love apocalyptic literature. So check this out. We're kind of past it now, but there was a moment where like all movies had like zombies in them, like somewhat recently. And then like vampires was a big deal. Like it seemed like everybody started ripping off that one movie, like vampires. All right. That's all John's doing. He's like, for some reason, American culture is really into vampires. So what if I wrote Revelation and I use vampires? That's the idea. He's using the most popular genre of the time, all right? Now, this genre, apocalyptic genre, is loaded, all right? It has its roots in Second Temple Judaism from 516 BCE to 70 CE, and it's likely drawn from Persian Zoroastrianism, a few Greek ideas, and then there's some like prophetic ideas. But here's what you need to know. The common features of this literature are highly visual aspects with visions, dreams, journeys to other realms. It's highly symbolic with myths and metaphors like cosmic battles between good and evil or light and darkness. And it's usually set in some context of like an invisible, heavenly, spiritual battle. All right? This is the first century's version of science fiction. Okay? Think about that. This is like John going, God, I got to get my point across. So how do I do it? I'll use sci-fi. And this is why I argue John's Greek may be awful, but don't knock the man. He must have been a genius. Because he took the popular writing and culture and genre of the day and he's like, I'm going to take it, I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to use it. And this is what he's doing, okay? Jeremy Duncan said it this way. This might help you. Make no mistake. John does not believe in literal dragons and beasts and very scary grasshoppers. He believes in the ability of art to illuminate the world. And that means for us who come along some 2 millennia later, in order to understand Revelation, we're going to have to need to learn to think like art historians. And so I want to do that with you right now. It's very easy. John shows us how it works. He said, and I quote, "As for the art that I gave you, let me break it down for you. It's symbolism. The 7 stars are 7 angels, and the 7 lampstands are 7 churches." Okay, great. What does that mean? Well, it was clear, apparently, this image that spoke to John was the God figure. And what John says is God, this divine, is present, standing amongst the 7 lampstands. What are the lampstands? They are the 7 churches. They are the bright lights inside the empire. And John has the divine present inside the empire, standing amongst the 7 churches. Amidst the oppression, amidst the collectives that are filled with anxiety, we are shown God is with them. But then this God figure holds the stars. The text says they're like 7 stars. What is John doing? Right up front, every first century reader would have known exactly what he's doing. For you to get it, it would be helpful to know something else about Domitian. He not only was the most egotistical leader in Roman Empire, I would argue, and he not only wanted his name and everything, but he, like a few other emperors, he decided that he needed to make sure people addressed him as Lord and God. And so he was like, what's the best way to do this? Oh, currency, economy. And so he created his own coin. I want to show it to you. Here's his coin. So this is Nero's face on the front of the coin, or Domitian's face on the front of the coin, and Domitian here on the back of the coin. Now hold this image for a minute. If you notice on that back coin, what do you see? Stars. Stars. So if you're reading this in 2025, hold the image, and the divine, or the John writes something like, this particular individual who was, quote, God, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, I saw one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe, and with golden sash across his chest. His head was like fire, white as snow. His feet were like bronze, refined as silver, and in his right hand he held 7 stars. What is John doing? Already, you start to get the feel. Oh yeah, the first century audience would have known this. They would have probably chuckled. Look at you, John. Look at you. You're claiming that your kingdom that you keep talking about and this God that you keep talking about is the one who actually holds the 7 stars. This stuff here, knock off. Knock off. Already you get political edges to what John is writing. This is how the book is going to work. This is what John is telling us. And then you need to know he uses prophetic literature. And here's what you need to know about the prophets. John makes at least 500 references or allusions to the Old Testament. 500. That should tell you all you need to know. What is he doing? Taking a playbook from the prophets in the Old Testament. What do we know about the prophets? And we're done. The prophet's task is to wake people up to God's visions of justice, generosity for the world. The prophets condemn injustice and greed, and they advocate for the poor, the widow, the foreigner, and the orphan. The prophets call out injustice. They call their empire to repentance. They speak truth to power, and they warn about the potential outcomes if we continue down the path we're going. This is what the prophets do. And John falls in a long line of prophets. And he says, I'm going to use two things because I'm a good Jewish boy. So I'm going to take the Hebrew prophets, and I'm going to pull them in, and I'm going to call the empire to wake up. Simultaneously, I'm going to take the popular genre of the day, sci-fi, and I'm going to hook it together and watch what happens in the book of Revelation. Also, take both those, center it right underneath an empire where this egotistical empire Domitian rules the day, and watch what happens. Now, let's finish here. You guys have been great. Only a couple of you fell asleep, which is actually a win for me, okay? I knew I wasn't coming here throwing sparks today, all right? Like, it's deep history stuff. I get all that. But I do hope you find this helpful at some level. Now, when you're reading the book, it's like, oh, that kind of makes a little more sense, okay? John does do something right here, because I think it's important to just, we'll start the tone of the series, because this is how he starts the tone of the book. I love what he says. All of that mentioned, before we get into all of the violence and war and cosmic Armageddon battle and all the stuff that John's going to do, and it's going to get wild. I cannot wait. I can't wait. It's going to get so wild for all of us. I do hope, my God, I hope you come back. I hope anyone comes back after today, all right? But it's going to get wild. But before we get all into that, like all of it, rapture and mark of the beast and 1,000-year reign and God, cataclysmic just destruction, and the earth is going to melt, and oh man, so much wild things are coming to us. But before we get on that, it can be such a daunting, scary, terrifying book, which is why a lot of people are like, gross. Like, why did that make it in? Get that out of here. I love how John starts it. John, too, is terrified. Apparently, he hears his voice. He's like, all right, get to writing. Write it down. And so the text says John turns around, and then it says he falls over as dead. And immediately you kind of get these shivers like, this is going to be something. But the God figure does something very calming. Very calming. And I think it's important that we highlight this as we close. Like before we get into all of the wildness of this book, but before we break into the world of the first century and this Emperor Domitian, before we get into that, I need you to understand something about the divine. And here's where just close with this. I fell at his feet as though dead, but he placed his right hand on me. I love this. God, I felt this when I read the book. He placed his right hand on me, and he said, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever and ever. Oh, and by the way, I, not Domitian, I have the keys of death and of Hades. And I just want us to start us there. This is the starting point. Not violence, not fear, actually the opposite. John is just telling us, before you get going in this book, strap on the seatbelt, it's about to get wild. Before you get going, I need you to know something. This God is not angry. This God is not filled with utter repulse from the humans that he created. In fact, even in the worst of circumstances, under the most egotistical emperor the world has ever seen, it's as if John is saying, I need to give you a glimpse of the heart of compassion the divine has. And he says this God figure just lays his right hand on him. And if I could lay my right hand on yours, I'm fully aware of what this week coming up means for a lot of us. I don't think there's a better time to walk what we're going to walk through. Some of you, tomorrow will be the most glorious day of your life. You're going to be celebrating, popping champagne, doing your thing. Let's talk in 4 years, but keep popping now. Others of you, terrified out of your mind. I get it. I have personal friends who have reached out to me this week looking for sanctuary churches to hide in. I also want you to know we're working as a church to help people like that in the coming years. And if it's necessary, we will break the law. We will. And whoever clapped, you'll go to jail with me, all right? I only know one number, and he's an attorney, and I'll call him if I go, all right? Now, all of that said, I'm also reminded that tomorrow is not just an inauguration, but how phenomenal that it also lands during a time where one of the greatest prophets ever given, Dr. King, is celebrated. And they're two contrasting images. And we can try to blend them together all we want, but it doesn't work. And so we get to make decisions as a collective. What is this going to look like for us? And I will tell you all I know to do. As a collective, I love for us to lean into ancient wisdom that John is writing. Because I think John has been in situations that don't even parallel to the American empire. Not even close. But I do believe we can learn a lot from what this man is saying. And I think the first place to start is right here. In the midst of LA fires, in the midst of what feels like utter chaos at the start of 2025. TikTok is gone. CapCut gone. That hurt me. That's what I make videos on. I'm like, what is happening in our world, right? All that. Don't worry, it'll be saved Monday or Tuesday. All right. But with the new administration coming in, President Musk and his Vice President Trump. Should I stop now? Is it getting okay? I just want to put my hand out, and I hope you feel this. I know we're all in different places, but may you feel the divine placing his hand on you right now, uttering these words before we get into the heart of it. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Because I'm telling you, this exposure, this revelation is necessary for the human species to keep evolving. And so, I ask you, don't turn your head. If you have the wherewithal, keep your eyes open. Be vigilant, be alert. And I want you to know this, as long as we're able, we will be meeting together. And we will walk through this together. All right, Bindings Lake, peace be with you. We'll see you next Sunday.